Okay, now that we've listened to a typical example of a rounded binary, let's look at another one. So this example, this March by J.S. Bach, is a trickier one when it comes to binary analysis, which is why we're looking at it. But the first question to ask yourself, does the piece divide into two parts? That's still very easy, right? So if we look at the repeat signs, the first part repeats, and then the second part repeats. So this is still clearly a binary piece. But exactly what type of binary, whether it's continuous or sectional, or in terms of the thematic material, whether it's rounded or simple or balanced, that's something we'll be looking at right now. Okay, so let's listen to the piece together. Starts in D major. Cadence is in D major. And starts to move away at G sharp. Toward A major. Repeats, D major. Still in D. Starts to move away from D. 5-1 in the key of A major here. Second half starts out in A major. Going through sequences here. Back to D major. Cadences in D major. Repeats. So second half starts in A major. And that G natural is what tells us it starts to move away from A major. 5 in D. 5-1 cadence in D major. Okay, so this one, when we were listening to it, I walk you through a few cadences and the key areas as well. Begins in D major, the piece begins in D major, ends in D major. But if we look at the middle part here, right before the end of the first section, E to A, E to A, and this A, repeated A here, is supporting A, C sharp, and E. So A, this whole part, these two measures, that's supporting an A harmony, A chord there, preceded by E, and also the Q, the clue here, G sharp. So everything is telling us this has already modulated to the key of A major. So because of that, we know we're looking at a continuous binary, not a sectional binary, because this first part does not cadence on one of the original key. It does cadence on 5-1, but it's in a new key, A major. So because of that, this is what we call a continuous binary. Okay. And the other question to ask yourself is whether the opening material returns at the end of the second half. Whether the opening material, this A material, returns toward the end of the second section. So remember earlier I said this example can be a trickier one, can be a slightly trickier one, and that's because of this. So if we look at the opening and listen to this opening one more time. So that's how it starts. Dum, bum, 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 bum. Okay, so that's the opening melody here. And if we now fast forward to the beginning of the second section, boom, 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 boom. That's pretty much the same melodic idea, pretty much the same melody, just transposed to the key of A. So this melody originally presented in the key of D is now presented in the key of A here. So maybe some of you will think, oh, that's the return of the opening material. Because of that, I'm going to call this rounded binary. But don't jump to the conclusion. That's not the right conclusion there. And why is that? It's because a rounded binary, if you remember the typical structure of a rounded binary means we have the opening material that we call an A, and then we go through contrasting material in the beginning of the second half. After the contrasting material, the A returns. That's a typical rounded binary. But in this case, if we call this A, this part, we can call this a transposed A. But they are not separated by contrasting material in the beginning of the second section there. So this material, first of all, is not in the right key, it's not back in the original key. Second of all, it's not in the right location, because in the rounded binary, the return of the opening material will happen in the second half of the second part. Okay, so one more time, this is not what we call a rounded binary. Number one, because this melody is not in the right key, not in the original tonic. Number two, this is at the wrong location. A typical rounded binary will feature return of the opening material toward the end of the second half. So for those two reasons, we don't know if this is a rounded binary yet. So if we keep going and try to find this bong 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 bong, this opening material in the second half, bong 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 bong, we won't be successful because that never returns in the correct key of D major. Okay, so what does that tell us? This is not a rounded binary. So two possibilities. This might be a simple binary, or this could be a balanced binary, depending on how the two sections end. So let's take a look. How does the first half end here? Bong, 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 bong. So arpeggiating that tonic triad there. At this point, that tonic triad is already in a new key. So in the key of A major. Bong, 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 bong. Accompanied by this repeated tonic bong 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 bong. Okay, so that's how the first section ends. And if we now fast forward to the end of the second section, bong 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 bong. So it's exactly the same melodic material but transposed to the correct key, because this is the end of the entire piece. This has to be back in the key of D major, the original key. And this melody is accompanied by bong, 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 repeated tonic, bong, 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 and then arpeggiated at the end. In other words, the two sections, they do end with exactly the same melodic material. Just one is in the key of the dominant, and the other one is in the original tonic, because we're coming back to an end here. So this is a typical balanced binary. It's the two sections, even though it doesn't feature a clear return of the opening material toward the end of the second section, they do end with the same melodic material, making this a balanced binary. So in conclusion, this example is what we call a continuous balanced binary. Okay, so one more time. Why is it continuous? We'll be looking at this part to answer that question. The piece begins in D major, but it clearly cadences in A major here, making this a continuous binary. And why is this a balanced binary? First of all, why is this not a rounded binary? And that's because bong, 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 this opening melodic material never clearly returns in the second half of the second part. Okay, and why is it not a simple binary? It almost looks like it could be a simple binary except when we listen to the end, we realize the end of the two sections are based on exactly the same melodic material, making this a balanced binary. So this is a typical example of a balanced binary. In many balanced binary examples that you're going to see in the future, you'll realize they actually are in different keys, which is very common because oftentimes the first half modulates to a new key, and then the second half will modulate back to the original key. But as long as they end with exactly the same melodic material, that's called a balanced binary.